I am continuing in my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am continuing reading in a chronological order, according to event, not according to publication or volume, so I'm skipping around a bit as I move along. We are continuing in the New Testament. This is the early years, within about 15, 16 years of Christ's resurrection. The gospel has been spreading out. Paul has been sent out on his first and I believe second missionary journey by this time. We've also read the epistle of James as he wrote to all the Jewish converts, and we are now reading in Galatians, Paul's first epistle, just after his second missionary journey to those in what we would today call Central Turkey. These are the Galatians. In this video, we have a Joseph Smith translation. Now, what the Joseph Smith translation is, this is a translation or correction done by Joseph Smith to restore those passages that have been lost or corrupted over the years. And we pick it up now in chapter 2. Now, in chapter 1, Paul has been recounting his conversion and his experience as a saint, what he has been doing, his journeys up to this point. And that's where we left it. We now read chapter 2. Then 14 years after, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, and took Titus with me also. And I went up by revelation, and communicated unto them that gospel which I preach among the Gentiles, but privately to them which were of reputation, lest by any means I should run, or had run, in vain. But neither Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. And that because of false brethren unawares brought in, who came in privily to spy out our liberty, which we have in Christ Jesus, that they might bring us into bondage, to whom we gave place by subjection, no, not for an hour, that the truth of the gospel might continue with you. But of these, who seem to be somewhat, whatsoever they were, it maketh no matter to me, God accepteth no man's person. For they who seemed to be somewhat in conference added nothing to me. But contrariwise, when they saw that the gospel of the uncircumcision was committed unto me, as the gospel of the circumcision was unto Peter, for he that wrought effectually in Peter to the apostleship of the circumcision, the same was mighty in me toward the Gentiles. And when James, Cephas, and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that was given unto me, they gave to me and Barnabas the right hands of fellowship, that we should go unto the heathen, and they unto the circumcision. Only they would that we should remember the poor, the same which I also was forward to do. He says 14 years after he went up again to Jerusalem. Now, I believe this was written in around the year 46, 47, something like that. If that was the case, then his conversion would have been in the same year as Christ's resurrection. That would have all happened in the first year. I'm not sure it did happen that soon afterwards, so we might have to push the writing of this epistle back a little bit, forward in history a little bit. And he does talk about the circumcision here, so maybe we should put this after we read Acts chapter 15, because that is clearly the controversy that is going on in the Galatians. Titus is a Greek, but he was not required to be circumcised in order to be baptized and have full fellowship in the church. That's what he's talking about here. Now, I do like in the beginning here, in verse 2, where it says, but privately to them which were of reputation, lest by any means I should run, or had run in vain. In other words, he went to the apostles. He didn't go and talk openly among the saints in Jerusalem. He went to the leaders, to the general authorities, Peter, James, and John, and he told them what he had been teaching. And he got their approval. It says, yes, that is, because he wanted to make sure he was teaching the right gospel. And that's what he means, had run in vain. So, I've been out there teaching for several years. Let's make sure that what I taught him was right. And he went and talked to the apostles first. He said, okay, this is what I've been teaching. Is there any error in my message? And they approved it. Peter, James, John, the other apostles also know you are good, you are teaching right. And that is what we talk. That's what he's talking about there. So he wanted to get their approval because they are the leaders. They were of reputation. They were the general authorities. At this time, I think Paul is more one of the 70, but there hasn't been a lot of direct communication. He's been out among the Gentiles for a number of years, and at the time the communication between the two was not as swift as it is today. And so he went back to make sure he was teaching the right doctrine. And he points out that they approved his doctrine, and he has never taught anybody that they needed to be circumcised. Now, he does say that there are false teachers who are come in telling the people that they need to be circumcised. These are not true saints. They may be baptized, but he's saying these guys they're not teaching the right gospel, because they're trying to bring you back into the bondage of the law of Moses. That's been done away. We don't need circumcision anymore. That's what he's saying. Now, he doesn't mention the letter and everything that we read in chapter 15 of Acts, which is why we're uncertain if he wrote this before or after that meeting in Acts 15. It's very interesting. The timing is somewhat difficult to pin down. Like with that mention of 14 years there, I'm thinking that he probably wrote this letter closer to the year 50, which would be about 16 years after the crucifixion, and meaning his conversion would have been about a year and a half after after the resurrection. He had his vision and was converted, and then for 14 years he's been among the Gentiles. The timing is a little hard to pin down, but the message is clear. We don't need circumcision anymore, and he is deferring authority to the apostles. Now, he says he met with James, Cephas, and John. Now, Cephas would be Peter. That is the Hebrew form of Peter. And this would indicate that this was while the three of them were still alive. It seems that James's martyrdom would have had to have been after this meeting here, which would be from Acts chapter 11, because I believe the record of his martyrdom is in chapter 12 or 13. So that would indicate this was before chapter 15. That's why I'm placing it here in this order. It's just confusing. Let us just move on. Verse 11. But when Peter was come to Antioch, I withstood him to the face, because he was to be blamed. For before that certain came from James, he did eat with the Gentiles. But when they were come, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing them which were of the circumcision. And the other Jews dissembled likewise with him, insomuch that Barnabas also was carried away with their dissimulation. But when I saw that they walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, I said unto Peter before them all, If thou, being a Jew, livest after the manner of Gentiles, and not as do the Jews, why compellest thou the Gentiles to live as do the Jews? We who are Jews by nature, and not sinners of the Gentiles, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ, even we have believed in Jesus Christ, that we might be justified by the faith of Christ, and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. But if, while we seek to be justified by Christ, we ourselves also are found sinners, is therefore Christ the minister of sin? God forbid. For if I build again the things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. For I through the law am dead to the law, that I might live unto God. I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me, and the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not frustrate the grace of God, for if righteousness come by the law, then Christ is dead in vain. Just to summarize Paul's words here, that the law he's referring to is the law of Moses. Whenever you see Paul writing about the law, he's talking about the law of Moses. He's not talking about the covenant law of God. He's talking about that which was added. By the law of Moses, there is no salvation. The law, even the law of the covenant, really, all it can do is condemn. That's the only power any law has, is the power to condemn. It is through the grace of Christ that salvation comes. The law condemns us. If the law could save us, there would be no purpose in Christ's atonement. That's Paul's message. But it seems, the event he's talking about here, seems that Peter came up to visit the saints in Antioch. And he was eating with the Gentiles. He was visiting with the saints. But then a company of Jews came up from Jerusalem with James. And when they came, in order to appease their sensibilities, he separated himself from the Gentile saints. And when he did that, the other Jewish saints in Antioch also separated themselves from the Gentiles, and it caused this division. And Paul got angry at it, saying, Peter, you're not setting up a good example here. And I think Peter was just trying to keep the peace, and probably in his mind it was, well, I don't want to offend these guys. We'll let them have their separate meeting, and then we'll have a meeting with the Gentiles. But this separation was causing problems, and Paul saw the potential for great controversy or great scandal. And he stood and he said, Peter, and he did it public, and he did it somewhat public, said, we can't do this. Either we're all saints or we're not. We can't be Jewish saints and Gentile saints. Either we're all saints or nobody's saints. I am a saint through Christ. Why would you try and return to the law that Christ has abolished? Anyways, let's look at the Joseph Smith translation. We have two. In verse 4, in the King James it says, and that because of false brethren unawares brought in, who came in privily. We have the correction. Notwithstanding, there were some brought in by false brethren unawares, who came in privily. So these people teaching that you need to still follow the law of Moses were not, they're false brethren. Whether they were actually baptized or not, they were brought in to teach. It's like some Jewish saints invited other Jews who were not saints to come and teach the Gentiles. And it wasn't done maliciously. They just thought, hey, the Gentiles might want the context of the Jews. And it caused some issues. Then we have in verse 14, very simple here, where it says, being a Jew, livest after the manner of Gentiles. We add, after the manner of the Gentiles. Very minor grammatical correction. Now, going back then, bringing in speakers, Jewish teachers to teach the Gentile converts, even if they were baptized, which I get the impression that they weren't baptized. It was baptized Jews bringing in like rabbis to explain the Jewish law to the Gentiles, and causing confusion. The Gentiles didn't understand why they needed to learn that when it wasn't part of the message that Paul taught. And it reminds me of people bringing in to like BYU speakers in BYU that are not members of the church, that are promoting secular or false philosophies and are brought into BYU or other church gatherings to teach the people, causing great confusion and everything going on. That's what was going on among the Galatians. And we can see that happening now, especially in BYU. But I'm going to leave that here, and I will see you in the next chapter.